Is Russia spying on the West from the backyard of Africa? Via satellites. While the West claims otherwise, the reality is quite different. Russia is supplying satellites to Africa. And with that, the West African nations have complete control over border surveillance, something the West was never able to accomplish. However, the West claims that a new Cold War has begun, with Africa serving as the theater of operations. Is it? Let's investigate. Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali made the decision to collaborate with Russia on satellite technology. But why now, and why satellites? The explanation on the surface is obvious: to administer large, sparsely inhabited areas and fight insurgencies. These countries require improved communications and surveillance systems. The Sahel has been rocked by Islamist militants, and the situation has gotten worse due to a lack of border control. However, a more profound query remains unanswered. Why did these countries look to Russia, a country so disconnected from the geography and history of West Africa? This is the reason. They have not lived up to the promises made by the West. The West has been forcing its governance, security, and development model on Africa for decades, frequently providing little more than limits and platitudes. Western countries have prioritized political correctness, human rights workshops, and never-ending conversations over tackling the region's actual security issues. While all of this was going on, militants were flourishing in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. It is critical to comprehend the circumstances surrounding Western failure in this area. The insurgency danger has only increased in these West African countries despite years of military assistance and intervention from Western governments, especially France. People don't talk about this hard fact enough. Although the West sent resources, they frequently disregarded these countries' true needs, providing band-aid repairs as opposed to long-term fixes. Russia, on the other hand, is providing a glaringly obvious and practical advantage: satellite equipment that can safely control internal communications, track the activities of insurgents, and monitor borders. This is a sensible agreement for militarily led regimes whose main priorities are national security and control. Not only may satellites be used to track terrorists, they are also essential tools for infrastructure development, agriculture, and communications. The ability of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali to govern themselves more effectively and freely has been revolutionized by access to this kind of technology. These nations will be able to completely avoid the Western-controlled communications infrastructure thanks to these satellites, something that was never before feasible. This action also demonstrates how fed up these African countries are with being viewed as helpless beneficiaries of assistance. They desire independence. They desire autonomy over their lives and to be treated with respect. The larger plan to distance oneself from Western influence includes this satellite agreement as just one more step. It's also more than just fighting insurgents. These satellites will also be used to detect climate change, handle natural disasters like droughts and floods, and keep an eye on the environment, problems that have long been made worse by the West's disregard for Africa's demands. Long-term stability will be enhanced by improved planning for urbanization, agriculture, and water management, all of which can be supported by technology. However, why Russia? Could these countries not have looked to China or another rising force? Russia did not suddenly find itself in Africa. This was a well-thought-out plan that was developed over many years of fostering ties with African leaders and taking advantage of errors made by the West. Russia withdrew from the African stage following the collapse of the Soviet Union. However, as hostilities with the West increased in the 2010s, particularly with the invasion of Crimea in 2014, Russia saw a chance to reclaim its place in the world arena. Africa was the ideal area to start because of its abundant riches and geopolitical significance. Russia has been putting in a lot of effort to present itself as a rival to Western power. They have never hidden their desire to subvert the West's hegemony in international affairs, and Africa provides them with a battlefield on which to do it without having to take on NATO head-on. How, therefore, could Russia persuade these armed regimes to stand with them? Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Although a large portion of the world has shunned Moscow, it is not alone. Instead, it is fortifying current friendships and forming new ones. Consider the three Sahelian countries in West Africa as an example: Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. The military juntas in charge of these three nations have decided to sever relations with their conventional Western allies. An important factor contributing to Russia's increasing sway in West Africa is the Wagner Group, a privately owned military organization closely associated with the Kremlin. The West enjoys portraying Wagner as a band of mercenaries that cause mayhem wherever they go, but the reality is as follows. They're experiencing outcomes. Wagner has been on the front lines and has helped to drive back militants in ways that Western forces have never been able to, while Western forces have been weighed down by rules of engagement and never-ending bureaucratic red tape. Russia was an obvious partner for these military juntas, considering Wagner's achievements. In contrast to the West, which places restrictions on all help, Russia does not preach. Instead, it provides real military support. Wagner's contribution to the war against insurgents has expanded. They now play a crucial role in the plan to maintain these regimes in office. Regime security has been the main reason for Wagner's presence in nations like Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic. By that, I mean defending the ruling governments, which aren't always. Resistance to Western imperialism and a common understanding of sovereignty form the basis of the connection between Russia and Africa. These military regimes do not like to hear speeches about democracy, elections, or human rights. Russia provides them with a solution to their current issues without passing judgment. For its part, Russia considers Africa to be a vital component of its worldwide strategy. Russia's global influence grows with every new alliance, gaining control over military installations, resources, and diplomatic influence. Additionally, the West's losing credibility on the region has coincided with Russia's increasing influence in Africa. Russia arrived at the ideal time following France's disastrous deployments in Mali and other West African countries, which many local communities perceived as neocolonialism masquerading as counterinsurgency. The Western forces withdrew, leaving a power vacuum that Russia filled by providing military hardware and now satellite technology. These nations are sending a strong message by standing with Russia. They are prepared to accept a new global order in which they have greater influence over their own lives because they are fed up with Western meddling. But is a new Cold War beginning with this satellite deal? It is necessary to consider this transaction within the framework of a much bigger geopolitical game in order to fully comprehend its ramifications. Africa is accustomed to becoming a pawn in international disputes. With disastrous results, the US and the Soviet Union divided and exploited the continent during the Cold War. With this satellite agreement, we may be seeing the beginning of a new Cold War in which the West and Russia compete not only for resources, but also for control over the destiny of Africa. The West has been losing ground in Africa for years on both the political and economic fronts. Russia is now gaining traction in Africa's military and technology sectors, joining China, which has already established itself as the continent's biggest commercial partner. While this is going on, the West has stuck to an antiquated model, concentrating on development and aid initiatives that don't really address the pressing needs of African countries. The satellite transaction is a perfect illustration of how disconnected the West has grown. Improvements in human rights and governance are still being pushed for by the US and Europe. Russia is providing answers for actual practical issues with infrastructure and security. These countries will have an advantage over Islamist rebels thanks to the satellite arrangement, something the West has not been able to provide despite years of military engagement. Technology isn't the only issue here. It has to do with control. Without depending on Western infrastructure, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso will be able to keep an eye on their borders, gather intelligence, and conduct secure communications thanks to the satellites. This may be the beginning of a larger trend whereby more African countries go to Russia for military and technological assistance, so undermining Western power in the area. The ramifications extend beyond the boundaries of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. This satellite contract is an indication of how quickly the power dynamics in Africa are shifting. Russia is becoming more and more present in Africa. It is successfully creating a new sphere of influence that directly opposes the Western countries' long-standing hegemony in the area. The West is already under strain, especially former colonial nations like France. They have failed to keep the Sahel stable, and Russia has stepped in quickly to fill the void. This is when the intriguing part comes in. Russia's aspirations are causing the US and Europe to become more cautious. And it's not implausible that in response, they would want to regain their dominance over the countries of Africa. Similar to what occurred during the First Cold War, when African states found themselves caught in the crossfire of great power battles. This could result in proxy conflicts. Africa is a vital strategic frontier for the West. Losing power here might result in losing access to important trade routes and priceless resources. Russia is establishing its dominance in the area. It's possible that the West will feel forced to retaliate, either by increasing its military engagement or applying diplomatic pressure. But for the time being at least, it's evident that Russia is in control, providing answers that the West has repeatedly failed to deliver. The discourse surrounding this satellite agreement primarily centers on geopolitical tactics. Yet it is crucial to acknowledge that the inhabitants of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso stand to gain genuine and palpable advantages. What concrete adjustments might they anticipate seeing then? These satellites are used for more than just military and border security missions. They could significantly enhance the quality of life for common people in these nations. A large portion of the Sahel has long lagged behind in the development of its infrastructure. Particularly rural areas lack access to dependable communications networks, internet services, television, and radio, and have been cut off from the outside world. This has significantly impacted these regions' access to healthcare, education, and employment possibilities. That might all change with these new satellites. These satellites will enable dependable communications infrastructure, enabling individuals living in distant places to maintain connections with the outside world. Online learning materials will be available to students, farmers will receive up-to-date meteorological and crop conditions information, and healthcare professionals will be able to collaborate more efficiently, particularly in areas that have proven challenging to access. This technology would essentially close the digital gap that has prevented millions of people in the Sahel from reaping the rewards of globalization. It's a significant step toward providing long-neglected rural populations with equal opportunities. It is impossible to overestimate the advantages of these satellites for security. For an extended period, rebels have been able to take advantage of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali's porous borders, traveling freely between nations and attacking both military and civilian targets. One of the key reasons the insurgency has been so hard to quell is the inability to monitor these borders. These nations will at last be able to more precisely trace the activities of insurgents thanks to real-time satellite surveillance. This translates into improved military force coordination, quicker reactions to threats, and ultimately safer conditions for civilians. This device could be the difference between life and death for residents of violent locations. Apart from providing security and connection, these satellites will also be essential for environmental condition monitoring. The Sahel has regular floods, wildfires, and droughts, making it one of the world's most climate-vulnerable regions. The foundation of the region's economy, agriculture, is severely impacted by these natural calamities. Governments will be better able to prepare for both immediate and long-term environmental concerns because to the satellite's real-time data on weather patterns, soil conditions, and water resources. Governments will be able to react to natural disasters faster and potentially save thousands of lives. Farmers will be able to make better judgments about when to grow and harvest crops. The sensation of empowerment this satellite agreement offers, though, may have the greatest effect. African countries have been dependent on Western powers for vital infrastructure, such as security and communications, for far too long. There have frequently been conditions linked to this dependency. Political situations that threaten the sovereignty of African states are often linked to Western funding. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are assuming responsibility for their own destiny by looking to Russia for satellite technology. They are independent of Western interests now. They are independent of aid from the West now. With this agreement, these countries will take a big step toward achieving full sovereignty and will be better equipped to manage their own affairs. Even while these advantages are obvious, there is a price associated with them. What therefore is in Russia's best interest from all of this? Russia's increasing presence in Africa is evidently driven by its desire to gain access to the continent's abundant natural riches. There are substantial mineral deposits in the Sahel region, such as oil, uranium, and gold. This satellite agreement is just another example of Russia's long history of using its connections with African regimes to secure access to these riches. Russia is setting itself up for future privileged access to these resources by forging military and technological alliances with these nations. It goes beyond satellite technology in this case. It's about creating long-lasting political and economic connections that will help Russia for many years to come. Apart from acquiring natural resources, Russia aims to increase its military power in Africa. Part of a bigger plan to create Russian military presence on the continent is the Wagner Group, which has been essential in providing security for these military administrations. Russia is consolidating its position in an area that has traditionally been dominated by Western countries by supplying military weapons and satellite technology. Russia has a strategic advantage on the international scene thanks to this military might. Russia can project strength into the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and possibly the Gulf of Guinea if it has a presence in West Africa. This is a part of Russia's larger plan to take on the US and NATO on several fronts, with Africa serving as a crucial theater of operations in this new global power struggle. The main goal of Russia's engagement in Africa is to subvert Western hegemony. The US and Europe have dominated world affairs for decades, frequently at the expense of smaller countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. However, Russia is trying to establish a new global order in which Western countries do not hold all the power as it makes a comeback on the international scene. Russia is assembling a coalition of nations that are prepared to resist Western influence by standing with African nations who have been disenfranchised by the West. Power, both military and economic, is not the only factor here. It has to do with ideology. By presenting an alternative to the Western model of economy and government, Russia is presenting itself as the protector of national sovereignty. This alliance with Russia offers Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso a means of escaping the constraints of Western reliance. Russia sees it as a means of increasing its power and forming a transnational coalition of countries willing to oppose the current quo. Furthermore, there is much more to the Burkina Faso-Russia satellite agreement than just technology. It has to do with power, sovereignty, and restructuring international alliances. This agreement signifies a departure from the broken promises of the West and a move toward increased sovereignty for these African countries. Russia views it as a strategic win that strengthens its position as a major player in the world and broadens its influence. It's a wake-up call for the rest of the world as well. Africa has moved past waiting on the West to provide solutions to its issues. The effects will be seen for years to come as it forges its own course. Given that Russia currently controls the satellite systems in West Africa, what do you think will happen to Western influence in the region? Is there a chance the West can win back the trust of these African countries now that they have turned to Russia for military and technological backing? Or is it already too late? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.